Hey everybody, Cole here with Classic Mini DIY, and on today's episode we're going to repair the tie rods on my car, we're going to do some ball joints, and we're going to install these new horns on my Mini as well because the horn I have doesn't work anymore. So, stay tuned. On my last video, which was a live stream, I talked about an accident I got into with the Mini and what happened, and we kind of diagnosed some of the problems that were related to that accident on the front suspension, the front right side of my car, one of which being the tie rod. So this is my old diagonal tie rod. This one was completely sheared and stripped. The nut that goes on there was just totally toast, as well as the threads that are on this actual tie rod. So I have to replace this. And with the suspension things, generally speaking, I like to do things in pairs. So I'm going to keep it symmetrical and I'm going to replace the tie rod on both sides of the car. I'm going to try and match the length of these so that the alignment is kind of close. I still got to get the car aligned afterwards. Also, I noticed that there were some issues with the ball joints. So what I'm going to be doing is replacing those. I'm going to replace all 4 ball joints on the front, and they're also called swivel joints, but I'm going to be replacing them with a set of ball joints that you don't have to service, you don't have to shim, you don't have to do any of that stuff. They literally just bolt on and they're ready to go. They're made out of Japan. For a set, they are a good bit more expensive. However, the goal here is that hopefully I won't have to service these and they will last a really, really long time. Once we get to the stage of putting those back on, I'm gonna do a little cost analysis for you guys to show you guys how much it's cost me to keep replacing these swivel joints over the years of owning this car in comparison to buying a set that ideally you won't have to replace any time in the near future. So we'll see if they're worth it. We'll see how they work out on the car. But first, we need to go ahead and get the existing ball joints off of the hub. So let's head out to the car. It's nice and sunny, which means it's hotter than hell here. And let's go get a sunburn and get this stuff off. Okay, so you might notice that my ball joint's already been disassembled a little bit. I was just kind of fiddling around in here, forgot to start filming. But in order to do this next part, we're gonna have to take the hub off. We're gonna have to take the whole hub off of the drive shaft, take the wheel bearing apart, which I really didn't want to do, but unfortunately it's just something that's going to have to get done. And in order to do that, the car either has to be able to stop, so in this scenario I've got my brakes right here ready to stop on the front here, or you can get a big old pry bar and set it in between the studs right here, and you can loosen the main nut right down here off and then ultimately take the drive shaft out. I'm going to loosen this nut first. Then, after this is loose, I'm going to take my disc caliper here off. That comes out of the way. And then the whole hub should come off once you disconnect the steering arm back here. You can kind of just work it off of the drive shaft. I hope I do not have to replace my wheel bearings, but I'm kind of preparing for that eventuality. Impact drivers are the best thing in the world, I tell you what. Okay, now with that disconnected, the last thing that we need to do is take our caliper off here. That's just 2 bolts, 1 and 1, and then we can take the whole hub assembly off. If your car's not high up off of the ground, you are going to need to like zip tie this up in some way. Otherwise, you're going to end up stretching out your brake line, which you do not want to do, obviously. Now, if this is gonna sit for a little while, like mine is going to be sitting for a bit, I'm gonna get a nice trash bag. I'm gonna tie it around this. I'm gonna cover this up. And the same thing can be said for your hub. You want this to be covered, clean, and no way for dirt to ingress into your wheel bearing. It looks like on mine, the dust shield is actually starting to wear down there, but it's not too bad. So let's head into the room. Let's put this on the bench vise and we can start taking our ball joints off, although this one is basically ready to come off anyway. We've got a nice protective bubble on this now. Very, very nice. So this can just kind of sit down here. You see that play down there as well? Actually, let's take a look at this real quick. Now it might be a little dark back here, but you can see this is my lower control arm right down here. And this bolt, that whole thing is moving in place. It definitely should not be doing that. You can see it even more on this front portion here, it moving up and down. That should be tight and in place, and it's not right now. So I'm sure that that is not ideal. That's gonna have to come out, see if we can get it tightened, and it looks like those bushes are almost ready for a replacement anyway. Of course, one small issue always turns into a bunch more issues that we have to, it's like pulling a thread on a shirt and it's just like the whole shirt starts to fall apart. Now, whenever you're doing something like this, usually there is an easy way, a hard way, and the hardest way. Now, of course, this doesn't want to come out nice and easy. Let's see here. And I'm trying to find a good way to put this in the bench vise, and there just isn't a good way for this to get clamped down. Maybe like this. All right, so now we're gonna go ahead and take this sucker off right here. And I think the easiest way that we're gonna be able to get that off is with my handy dandy impact wrench with a socket that's not made to be an impact wrench socket. So just a pro tip for those of you who have a big zip gun like this, always get the impact specific sockets. Don't do what I'm doing here. Now with basically no fuss, that came right off thanks to the impact wrench, or zip gun as I've heard it called. We can take our bottom washer off here, and I don't know if, so I didn't originally put these on, I don't think, and the lock tabs aren't bent up on these things, so I'm guessing that's why it got loose. Man, that grease smells bad. I cannot believe how bad that grease smells. And I've got my little bag of shims here, so I'm gonna save these for another occasion. And now what we're left with here is an empty ball joint socket. Let's go ahead and get this tab out here. There we go. And our spring. And now we can get that nice and clean. One of the best things that I've done in a while is I've got these microfiber towels, and granted, you normally use these microfiber towels for something that's a little bit nicer. Things like windows and the body of your car, well, you know, I don't know, I'm not a car detailer. But they actually work really well for oil and grease. It grabs it, and it doesn't leave residue on there, which is one of the biggest things that you gotta combat when you're lubricating something, is not leaving residue. And then I have a laundry service that actually exists here in Charlotte. They pick up the bag of dirty laundry, and I get to reuse these over and over and over again. They'll wash it no matter how dirty it is. It's pretty cool stuff. For anyone who has a laundromat nearby them, I strongly recommend checking out and seeing if that's something you can do. It's a great way to cut down on waste, so you're not constantly using disposable rags. Now, just like the actual hub, if you are storing this and you're not going to be immediately putting on new ball joints, you must cover it, especially if you're not going to be replacing your wheel bearing, because you don't want any dirt, any debris to get inside there. All right, and then the next step is going to be removing this top arm. As you can see, it's bent here. This has to come out. We're going to have to replace that, unfortunately. So that means disconnecting the shock absorber. I've got to take this off of here. It can't hang there anymore. Next, we will take this bolt out where my bump stop is. We're also gonna need to lower my high-low back here all the way down so that we can get my spring out, and then we should be able to lift all this stuff out of here. We can inspect the nylon cup and the actual bottom of this high-low. Should be okay, hopefully, but we shall see. And this job is a little bit annoying because you do have to get to the bolt that holds the right side of the top arm. You have to get to that on the inside of this firewall or inside of this bulkhead right here. That is something that's hard to reach. And then you have your other nut right back here. So let's start taking this stuff apart. The first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take the shock absorber out. I'm gonna disconnect it from the top and the bottom and whack it out the front here so that it's out of the way. Then we can focus on getting that spring out. Now, unfortunately, in the case of this here, this adjustment bolt that goes into the trumpet is a little seized, even though I put anti-seize on that when I've installed these. So I'm gonna add a little bit of tension to this, not a ton, and I'm hoping that it lifts it up enough, puts tension on the trumpet, enough for me to take this off, or enough of the tension is off of my bump stop here so I can remove the bump stop itself and get it off. And to do that, I'm gonna use my handy dandy damaged camshaft here. This is not a usable camshaft, so I'm going to use it to kind of prop up underneath the top arm here and use my floor jack and lift that sucker up. And something I just want to make a mention of, this bump stop is an oversized bump stop. It's made specifically for the springs so that you don't get too much droop and your springs don't fall out or get damaged while you're driving down the road. Now, just so you guys know what I just did, this plate right here lives right in here. It's held in with two bolts, just like that, and one big nut on the actual pivot shaft here. So now this is completely free, and what we need to do is loosen up the nut that's back here, and then what we'll be able to do is push the pivot shaft out the front. You'll be able to take this arm out, and then we'll be able to replace it with a new one, of course. There we go. So I still have a spring that looks like a spring. I still have a trumpet that looks like a trumpet, and the actual ball socket here, feeling it now, feels in really good shape. So I'm not too worried about that. I probably do need to replace that rubber boot. It's kind of torn up and ratty and tatty. Now, luckily, I keep a few things in stock in general. I keep perishable like rubber in stock, something like this. It's really easy, they're cheap, and having them around is really nice, so you don't have to wait for parts orders. Another thing I keep around are knuckle replacements. So you can see here, I've got a whole knuckle replacement here for my pivot shaft, and this is gonna go in right here, just like this. Let's give this little hammer down here. And so now you can see we have our new top arm here with the dust cover still on it for right now, my new trumpet, and all that can go back in the car. But you can see the difference between these, how bent this one is and how straight this one is, which is, this is what we want, that's what we don't want. Pretty straightforward, I think. Now, as you can imagine, the process of putting this back in is basically just the reverse. Don't forget, you do have to grease this after you're done. Also, don't forget, you're going to want to replace dust covers like this while you're putting this on. It's a really good time to go ahead and replace all these kind of perishable parts. Okay, so now with all the fuss of the top arm out of the way, the last thing that we need to do before reinstalling our hubs with the ball joints and everything is reinstalling the lower control arm, which is this right here. This needs to go back on, and then we also need to reinstall our tie rod. This is the diagonal tie rod, and this little unit right here holds your lower control arm right here. This slides through the bushings on your lower control arm, just like this, and tightens it and holds it in place there. Now, you'll find that there's a small step in this, and you're gonna wanna line that up with the notch that's right over here on the front side of your subframe. That'll slide in, and you gotta kinda do both at the same time, so you'll slide this in, slide your control arm on here, and then you'll tighten the sucker down. Now, one thing I do want to mention is these lower control arms are a little special. They are a fixed 1.5 degree of camber. That's negative camber. So it's a little bit more performant. It's a little bit more aggressive stance on your car, but they're not adjustable. Now, the ones I had previously were adjustable, and I decided to switch to these fixed ones because I was tired of adjusting them. I always went with 1.5 degrees. I never went over that because I don't race this car, and frankly, it just didn't seem worth it to me anymore. So this takes that little bit of annoyance out of the way, and you're always gonna have that 1.5 degrees of camber there. Now, I did stick with the heavy-duty adjustable front diagonal tie rods just because it's what I had before, which I guess kind of contradicts what I just said about the other one. However, the way that I am going to keep this, and I'm hoping that I don't have to realign the car, only because what I did is I matched the length of these tie rods to the ones that came off of the car, because the ones that came off were not bent, so there's no reason for me to try and fuss with it and see. I'm hoping that it will then keep it the same length, and I'll have the same alignment on the car, and it just won't be any fuss. So I put this purple poly bushing on the inside, so that goes right in here. And then I have a black poly bushing that goes on the outside. Notice the little divots are inside. They're facing in towards the actual clamping space here on your subframe. You have your washer cup, and then you have your locking nylon nut. This is what stripped on my other one, and part of what caused all the damage down here was when it hit that curb, this bolt came out and then it lost all of the support it needed. Now, one other thing I do want to mention is for this lower control arm mount, I am going to add a little bit of anti-seize to this so that in the future I don't have to fuss with it if I ever have to replace the bushings, although they are brand new for this application as well. And the lubrication I have is actually a brake parts anti-seize, but it'll do the job, and the bushings should slide on there nice and easy, and hopefully not seize in the future, but who knows. Small hole needs to face forward. Your diagonal tie rod is going to attach to this small hole here, and then this is where your lower ball joint goes in. All right, great, so that's in place. So you might have noticed, first off, I used a different nut to kind of tighten this down and into place. That pulls the actual little bar that goes across here into place, tightens up the bushings in there, and then with that in place, I took this off and put my nylon lock nut on here so that that doesn't come off in the future. Now we can do our lower control arm here, and let's move this brake out of the way so you can see this a little better. So you have your piece that goes in right here. I advise going ahead and setting this in place and then kind of whacking this into place so that it all lines up. Now, with that stuff out of the way, we can come back into the shop and we're going to focus exclusively on installing our new ball joints. And before we do that, I want to talk about something. With this whole accident with the car and everything, it's actually given me a great opportunity to replace my ball joints with something that I've been wanting to try for quite a few years. Now, what you're looking at currently is a standard ball joint. There is this like cup piece right here, your rubber gator, your actual piece that goes right through here, the actual ball and pivot shaft, and then you have shims, a spring, your washers, and of course the little collection spots for the bottom of your pivot shaft here. Now, this is a tried and true ball joint pretty much that people, if you've been working on your Mini for a while, this is what you're probably used to seeing. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with these exactly. They work, and all you have to do in order to get them, you know, set up properly is shim them up to create the correct amount of preload on these. Now, there's a lot of like information on the internet about how to shim it properly. I have a bag full of these shims because one, these ball joint kits never come with enough shims in my experience. What you end up having to do is set this by feel 90% of the time. So you need to know what the correct feeling of a preloaded ball joint is. Some people say it's barely movable with your hand. Some people say it should just be a little difficult to move, but it should still be movable. And then others have all sorts of different other recommendations about how these need to go on properly. The end of the day is that there's a lot of variance in there. But these do work, and they're not super expensive. I think for a kit, I think for a set of these, it's like 17 pounds, so maybe like $25 there. And it's not awful. And you can't really go wrong with these. But what I am excited to show you guys is a no service, no shim, preloaded ball joint. So let me show you guys what those look like. So this is the new style ball joint. Now, as you can see here, it's actually pretty cool. It's preloaded, it's pre-shimmed. All you have to do is take your normal lock washer. This gets knocked up on your hub, and then this gets tightened down to spec. And once that's on there, tightened to spec, all you do is attach your ball joint to your top arm and your lower control arm. It's super simple, and as you can see, it's a really, really different style ball joint. Same concept, but improved. So let's jump over to the bench vise and get this installed. So here we are looking at the top side of our hub here. So obviously we've got a ball joint that needs to go on the top and the bottom. So we're gonna take our washer here, we're gonna slide it over. Now on the side here, you're gonna have a little grease nipple, so it's important. You need to reinstall the grease nipple, make sure it's cleaned up so that you're gonna be able to grease these. So with that grease nipple installed, all that we have to do now is install our new ball joint. So this should thread right on without too much fuss.
Excuse me, senor.
And so we'll go ahead and take this off because we are going to need to torque this down.
Like this.
Now make sure that you torque these down. They need to get torqued to between 70 and 80 foot-pounds of torque. So you're gonna need to do that on the top and the bottom. And aside from that, you just repeat the steps to install these on the top and the bottom of the other side, and then this can go back on in the car. All right, so now we can finally put this back together. We gotta take our zip ties off, we gotta take our cover off here. Remember, now is one of the best times to go ahead and replace the wheel bearings in the event that you need to replace the wheel bearings, the rubber on this, anything like that. But in my case, those have been replaced.
Yeah.
So as you can see, the wheel's back on. We've got two lugs in. I'm gonna do the same thing to the other side of the car here, and then I'll torque this down here. So I'm not gonna show you the other side because you obviously got a pretty good idea how that works on this side. Now, that wraps up this episode of Classic Mini DIY. I covered pretty much all of the crash damage. I took it for a little test spin. It doesn't feel quite right in the steering yet. I'm gonna bring it and get it aligned just to see, just to make sure that it's not just a simple alignment thing. But if it isn't, I'm really nervous. I'm actually pretty nervous about the fact that the steering rack might be damaged. So it didn't look visually damaged to me, but who knows, maybe something's bound up inside. I'll have to take a look if the alignment doesn't fix it. Now, a huge shout out to 7 Mini Parts for getting me pretty much 90% of the parts that I used on this episode. The only thing I didn't get from them this time was the no service ball joints from Japan. Those things were absolutely incredible. I hope they hold up well. You guys saw they're super easy to install. Grease them up just like the other ball joints and you're ready to roll. So I'm very pleased with those ball joints. And if you're interested in picking those up, a link to those is in the description below, as well as all the other parts, the lower control arm, the tie rods, everything, all in the links in the description. And if you pick up any of the parts from 7 Mini Parts, I do get a small kickback, which helps support the channel. Now, I'm pretty sure this video is going to drop while I'm at the International Mini Meet, but expect a few more videos, maybe from the event, well, definitely from the event. Those will be coming out. I don't know if I'm going to do them during the event or if I'm going to wait till I get home and edit them, but one way or another, it's going to be a good time, and I'm excited to share that with you guys. So with that, and until the next episode, enjoy those minis and motor on.